This is a true story, one that I can remember clearly. This story is the kind that can traumatize you for years because it haunts you like dark shadows that never fade. I'll do my best to tell my experience as I remember it, so you can feel the bone-deep terror of what lurks silently, waiting to catch you off guard. I grew up in a small town where the deep woods were part of everyday life. We usually play under the towering trees, hiked old trails, and spent countless nights around campfires. For many, the forest was a place of calm, a natural playground. But one summer, a camping trip turned into a nightmare, one that twisted our lives in ways we never expected. It was late June when my best friend Tom, his cousin Jake, Jake's girlfriend Sarah, and I decided to escape our busy lives, away from stress and distraction, have some fun time with friends. So we decided to spend a weekend deep in the wilderness. We planned it all carefully, a hike into an untouched part of the forest, a clearing near a quiet stream, and no cell service, just us in the wild. We set out at sunrise, full of excitement. Everything was going well, the forest, with a bright light filtering through the leaves, birds chirping, and the fresh smell of pine. But as we pushed deeper, the sounds of everyday life faded away. There was a strange silence between the calls of birds and the rustling of small animals, a silence that made our hearts beat a little fast. After hiking for about 10 miles, we found the perfect clearing. It was surrounded with old trees, their thick trunks forming a wall around a small, open space by a sparkling stream. We decided it was a safe place to set up camp. I remember Tom saying, "This spot's so perfect, it feels like the set of a horror movie." We all laughed, not knowing that his words would soon carry a much darker meaning. That evening, as we built our campfire, the wind picked up, making the trees groan. The fire danced in the dark, throwing shifting shadows across our faces. We passed around stories of ghosts and strange happenings, unaware that something real and twisted was about to join our circle. After a meal of grilled meat and simple sides, we sat around the fire sharing stories. The laughter of the night mingled with the crackle of burning wood until a low, slow rustling came from the nearby bush. We paused. I remember Jake trying to be the brave one. He said, "It's just the wind, guys, it's nothing." But then we heard it, a soft voice, almost like a plea. "Help, please." It was distant, trembling, and it sent shivers down our spine. Sarah's eyes were wide with fear. "Do you think someone's out there?" We decided to secure our food bags up in the trees, remembering that animals might be drawn to our scent. Still, the feeling of being watched didn't leave us. The night grew long and uneasy, and none of us could shake the impression that something was lurking just beyond the glow of our fire. As the fire died down to glowing embers, we went back to our tents, sleep coming in fits and broken dreams of unknown faces peering from. The next morning, with the sun barely rising, we prepared breakfast over the dying fire. The unease from the night before hung over us like a thick fog. Tom proposed that we explore the area around our campsite, a decision that would soon unravel our sense of safety. We followed an old game trail that wound its way deeper into the woods. After an hour of hiking, we stumbled upon something unexpected, an abandoned campsite. There, in a small clearing much like ours, lay a tattered tent, its fabric hanging in shreds from old branches. A rusted camping stove sat toppled beside a small fire pit, and scattered on the ground were personal items, old clothes, a broken water bottle, and even a faded photograph. Something was very wrong here. The campsite looked as if it had been left in a hurry. Even more disturbing were strange carvings on a nearby tree, a mix of crude symbols and initials. The symbols were drawn deep into the bark, as if someone had been marking their territory, or perhaps sending a warning. "Who would leave in such a rush?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Jake picked up the photograph. It showed a smiling family, though the edges were too worn to read the names. The image was eerie in its normality, a stark contrast to the unsettling scene before us. We decided to leave the abandoned camp quickly, our steps quickening as the dense forest seemed to close in around us. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves set our nerves on edge. On our way back to our own campsite, we found a strange clue, a single worn boot half buried in the soft earth. It was old, battered by time, yet looked out of place on a fresh trail. Jake knelt down to inspect it, his eyes narrowing in confusion. "Do you think it belongs to someone from the abandoned camp?" he asked. Tom examined the boot, his face grim. "It doesn't look like it was left behind by accident. Someone's been here and not just passing through." That afternoon, while we tried to shake off the ominous feeling, small signs began to appear. A broken branch that wasn't on our path, footprints that seemed too deliberate, and an almost constant sense of being followed. We tried to laugh it off, but the forest was whispering secrets we weren't meant to hear. When night fell, we decided to set up a watch. One of us would stay awake, the others try to rest, all the while listening for any sign of the unknown presence. It was around 3 a.m. when I woke to the sound of someone calling out in the darkness, a faint, desperate plea. "Help, please help me." I tapped Tom, who was already half awake. The voice wasn't far now. It was as if it came from right outside our tents. "Tom, did you hear that?" I whispered urgently. Tom sat up, his eyes scanning the pitch-black surroundings. "Yeah, it sounds human, but something's off. It sounds like a trap." Before we could decide what to do, the voice came again, more desperate, and then silence. Suddenly, a figure burst from the shadows. A man, wild-eyed and covered in grime, emerged carrying a rusty machete. His eyes glinted in the moonlight, filled with a madness that chilled me to the bone. He swung his machete in a wide arc, and in that moment, everything turned into chaos. Jake, who was nearest to the intrusion, took a step back and got slashed on his arm. The crimson spray was stark against the dark fabric of his clothes. "Run!" Tom shouted. The man's attacks were sudden and brutal. He lunged at us with a speed that defied his wild appearance. In the chaos, our peaceful night shattered into screams and frantic shouts. Sarah and I scrambled out of our tents. I grabbed her hand, and we ran blindly into the forest, the sound of the attacker's heavy footsteps pounding behind us. Tom tried to confront him, but the man was too fast. In a terrifying moment, we lost sight of him among the tall trees. We ran as if the woods themselves were trying to trap us. The branches whipped at our faces, and the undergrowth tore at our clothes and skin. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. Behind us, we heard the relentless thud of footsteps and the occasional cry of pain as one of us stumbled or was struck by an unseen force. Sarah tripped on a hidden root, twisting her ankle painfully. I helped her up, urging her to keep moving despite the searing pain. "We can't stop now," I said, though my own legs trembled with exhaustion. The voice of the attacker echoed through the trees, a low, taunting hum that seemed to guide his steps. "I know you're out there," he called, his voice filled with a sick sort of glee. "You can't hide forever." Every time we thought we had lost him, a flash of movement at the edge of our vision sent us sprinting again. The forest, which had seemed so beautiful in the daylight, was now a maze of terror and uncertainty. At one point, we found refuge behind a large boulder. There, in the eerie silence, we tried to catch our breath, but our respite was short-lived. The rustle of leaves and the crunch of twigs signaled that he was closing in. The fear was obvious. We were trapped in a nightmare with no clear escape. The next few minutes were a blur of fear and adrenaline. We decided that hiding was no longer an option. With nowhere to run, we had to confront our attacker. Armed only with a few small knives and our will to survive, we crept out from behind the boulder, moving silently towards a narrow gap between the trees where the moonlight broke through. There he was, standing alone in a small clearing. The man's wild eyes scanned the darkness as if expecting more victims. His machete glinted, and his breathing was heavy and ragged. In that moment, we all knew that our lives depended on our next actions. I stepped forward first, my hands shaking as I gripped my knife. "Stop!" I called out, my voice shaky but firm. He turned slowly, a twisted smile playing on his lips. "You shouldn't have come here," he said in a low, menacing tone. His voice was calm, almost polite, in a way that made the threat all the more chilling. Before any of us could react, Tom lunged forward from behind the cover of trees. The attacker's attention shifted, and for a few moments the clearing became a chaotic blur of shouts, clashing steel, and desperate struggles. I managed to drive my knife into his side, and Sarah, summoning a strength, jumped him with a heavy rock. He screamed, a sound that was not entirely human as he staggered back. But then, in a twist that none of us expected, he didn't retreat. Instead, he beckoned as if inviting us to come closer. "You're brave," he whispered, "but this is only the beginning." In that moment of hesitation, we realized something was terribly wrong. His eyes were not just wild, they were calculating. His movements were too precise, his words too rehearsed. It was as if we were part of a twisted game he had been planning for a long time. With a sudden burst of energy, Tom grabbed the attacker by the collar, twisting him until he spat out a curse. "Who are you?" Tom shouting at the man, his voice shaking with anger and fear. The man's smile faded, replaced by a cold, hard expression. "I am no one," he hissed. "I am the shadow of these woods, and you have only seen a fragment of what lies beneath." Before we could press for more, the man broke free, slamming his machete against a tree and creating a diversion. In the ensuing confusion, he disappeared into the dark forest, leaving us standing there, battered and confused. We dragged Tom back to our campsite, our breaths ragged and minds reeling. Jake's wound was deep, and Sarah's ankle was pounded painfully, but we managed to set up a makeshift bandage system. As dawn crept over the horizon, we stumbled onto a logging road and flagged down a truck. The driver's concerned eyes told us that our story was beyond anything he had ever heard. At the hospital, as doctors stitched Jake's arm and checked our injuries, we tried to piece together what had happened. The man's words haunted us. Who was he? What did he mean by the shadow of these woods? The questions piled up like fallen leaves in the forest. But the real twist came later. A few days after the attack, as we began to recover, strange things started to happen. Tom, who had been the most determined among us during the confrontation, began acting oddly. He would stare off into space with a distant look in his eyes, and sometimes mutter things about the forest and the man we encountered. At first we thought it was shock, but then we found out that Tom had disappeared for hours in the woods without any memory of what he did. One evening, while visiting a local diner to seek answers about our attacker, we met an old man who claimed to know the forest's secrets. "That man," he said in a hushed tone, "is part of an old ritual, a twisted tradition that some have kept alive for generations. He is not just an attacker, he is a guide, one who tests those who dare enter these woods." He went on to say that many years ago, a group of locals had formed a secret pact with someone like him. They believed that the forest held dark power, and that by sacrificing those who ventured too deep, they could keep a balance between nature and man. The old man's eyes shone with a mix of fear and respect. "The woods choose their own," he warned, "and once chosen, you can never truly leave." We left the diner in silence, each of us reeling from the revelation. Tom's behavior grew stranger by the day, and he began to hint that he had been in contact with the man. A dark meeting in the heart of the forest. It was as if the woods had marked him, or he had been chosen by that shadow to carry a secret message. Late one night, as we gathered in the hospital room for a final discussion of what we experienced, Tom suddenly stood up. "I have to go back," he said in a flat tone. "There's more I need to understand." Before any of us could stop him, he slipped out the door into the night. We later learned that Tom had been found wandering near the edge of the woods, his eyes empty, as if he were no longer in full control of himself. He wouldn't speak of what happened during his time away, leaving us with more questions than answers. Months have passed since that twisted weekend. Jake's scar is a permanent reminder of that night, and Sarah still wakes up in cold sweats. As for me, I try to keep the memory locked away, yet every time I step near the woods, I feel that unseen presence watching me. I learned that the abandoned campsite we found earlier had been used for decades by a secret group, one that believed in an ancient power hidden in the forest. The man we encountered was likely a pawn in their ritual, or worse, their guardian. The logging road we took out of the woods was soon swarmed by police, but no trace of that shadowy figure was ever found. It was as if he vanished into the very soul of the forest. And then there was Tom. He speaks little now, and sometimes stares into space with a haunted look. Late at night, he mutters phrases that send shivers down my spine. Phrases about the call of the woods and the price of secrets. We all know that something changed in him that night. A part of his mind was lost to the dark magic or twisted tradition of those deep woods. The forest still whispers at night. I can't shake the feeling that the woods are alive with hidden truths, and that somewhere, hidden among the trees, the shadow still waits for its next victim. What started as an innocent adventure turned into a labyrinth of terror, secrets, and a twisted bond with the dark heart of nature. So, if you ever plan to venture deep into the woods, remember our tale. Not all dangers come from creatures or monsters. Sometimes, the worst horror is born from a human mind, twisted by ancient rituals and the dark whispers of nature. And once the shadow finds you, you may never be free again.